something that we dug up in our research that we can tie to the conversation we've just been having is that Protopia has published an insightful series of articles called The Executive's Guide to Secure Data and Impactful AI. We'll be sure to include a link to that in the show notes. That happened to be in partnership with Sol Rashidi, whom we've already been talking about since the beginning of this episode. And the second article in this series is called Risks in AI Systems and Mitigation Strategies. I'd love to hear from you about what the biggest AI risks are for enterprises that they frequently overlook. And something that comes to mind for me in the context of kind of the homomorphic encryption that you've been talking about recently is when people are doing compute, whether it's on a cloud device or edge, there are security vulnerabilities that you have no control over and that pop up all the time. I think let's dig into that risk and how Protopia can mitigate the risk.
Yeah, I think what we talk about in that kind of three-part series around risks, and when we think about what is it that's often overlooked, is that there's new usage models around AI and language models that are different from how data has been used in the past with just any application. The main difference being this notion that the systems are increasingly complex to maintain. I'm not necessarily talking about just very large systems to train these. No, back to the example of open model, deploying it at scale for many users and managing that non-trivial task. Doable, non-trivial. Enterprise needs time to value. They need their infra provider, application providers to help them do that. The data owner in the enterprise doesn't really want to, nor can they get involved with all the implementation details of what happens in these systems. Okay? Now, a common thought process is to say, if the implementation is somehow inside my VPC, or the implementation is on-prem, it is much, much safer than if it's somewhere else. And I think that's something that gets overlooked sometimes because at the end of the day, the implementation details are not particularly clear if you have some entity helping, right? And that entity can just be the IT department of your organization or someone external, right? And the data owner does not want to or have the time to get involved with every implementation detail of where did the data, until what point was it encrypted and what point did it get decrypted and did it get stored after that? And if it got stored, how long did it get stored? All the things that go into accepting whether or not an implementation is good. These deployment models and this sort of use of data is relatively new, and it's based on
Nude.
It's nude. It's raw and it's unencrypted.
Yeah.
And it exposes the data. That's funny actually, slip of the word in there. Yeah. But the model is new. And so I think organizationally, what we see enterprises grapple with is, again, back to this notion of, okay, what are all of the system security features that we need to put into play? And it doesn't always consider, many people are aware of it, but doesn't always consider that even on-prem systems, often it just takes a bad container being run to expose the entire system because of some vulnerability in the state-of-the-art software that you were using running. Knowing that that is a possibility and wanting to not just block every use case that touches some tier of data that is sensitive in some way, and that can be code. Code completion is one of the big use cases that now post-RAG, like that's the biggest enterprise use case that comes up, right? Code completion, code refactoring, writing snippets of code in bigger bodies of code. These are use cases that pop up all the time. Yet, it's very difficult to envision calling code in the organization non-sensitive and it can be sent to whatever platform. It can't. So in order for those things to actually make progress, being able to proactively make sure that if and when leakage of data happens, it's not exposed in a unencrypted, nude, raw way, right? That's the thing that I think we find organizations very interested in digging into once they realize that it's an aspect that is getting in the way of creating value. Because when we talk to organizations, our point is not at all to say you shouldn't be doing something. There's plenty of tooling in the market that helps them stop requests going to services that they don't want to, or helps the CISO understand what systems are being used, what data sources are being connected to what models. And those are all very important part of the overall AI security posture that the organization needs to have. But when you need to create value, how can you do that safely? And that's the part that we've been having a lot of interesting conversations around.